You're listening to an archived Cabral Concept podcast. After listening to this show, check out the most up-to-date podcasts available at stephencabral.com/podcasts or search directly on iTunes. And now, welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
On our Total Wellness Tuesday show, where we are about to get into exactly how the body begins to break down under stress. I really believe this is going to be one of the most important shows that I do, and the reason is that so many of our health issues, our body transformation issues, and our aging issues has to do with chronic daily stress or chronic weekly stress. It's not always just one major stressor, but it's the accumulation of stress over time that really wears on our body. It's what begins to break down our body systematically, and I want to show you exactly what happens because I'm almost guaranteeing you that no one's ever shared this with you before. And the reason is that I know the education that's given to a lot of doctors, and it really is fantastic in order to help people who have a disease, who have a diagnosed disease, and maybe keep them alive if they're not honestly willing to do a lot of the natural health-based measures. And I'm very grateful that we do have those things. But very rarely, if ever, is a doctor even allowed, because of time, to explain to you what's going on inside of your body, where your blood work is trending towards your lab tests, and what you need to do from a healthy diet, exercise, stress reduction, rest, emotional balance, toxin removal, supplement protocol, right? They're not getting into that. And the truth is that they don't even have the time to, because they have to see a new patient every 15 minutes or so, except for your annual 1-hour visit that they call a wellness visit, which the truth is it's not really a wellness visit. It's more of a physical, and you go through your yearly plan. But here's the thing. I really want you to know, and this is important for the next generation, and it's important for us to share with our family and community as well, is that we are the ones that have to take control of our own health. That no one else is really responsible for it or could even help us in terms of where we need to go, what we need to do, because they can't invest the time necessarily in us like we can. And that's why your daily accumulation of knowledge in terms of health, your striving to be better, your ability to learn just a little bit more and then adapt and see how it works and makes adjustments along the way. That is how you ultimately achieve any of your health, wellness, weight loss, anti-aging based goals. And so hopefully today's show will share with you more of how to do that and really the importance of beginning to lower stress in your life from all factors, not just emotional stress, but GI stress in terms of digestive stress, which does stress your body, in terms of nutrient deficiencies, in terms of toxicities, in terms of food sensitivities, etc. So what I'm looking to do is overall empty our rain barrel, begin to reduce stress, and here's why. So the body has two main processes. Let's look at it like that. We have something called homeostasis, and homeostasis is what the body does to maintain a level, a balance. And it does that by, if our pH starts to drop a little bit in our blood, well, the body will use minerals or other factors in order to be able to alkalize that blood to a little greater degree and keep it to right around 7.356 is the pH that we're shooting for. A little bit above, a little bit below, that's okay, but not too much a point above, not too much a point below in terms of what we're actually talking about in terms of tenths of a point, not an actual point. Your blood could not get to 8.356 or 6.356. That's not going to happen. So what we want to see is, okay, we have a process of homeostasis, and that our body is able to maintain the right amount of minerals for the most part in our blood, which is our electrolytes if we look at that, and it allows for our heart to beat, etc. But there's another process that we don't talk about as often, and that's called allostasis. And allostasis, just by definition, is our body, so it's the process in which our internal and physiological equilibrium is maintained in response to an actual or perceived environmental or physiological stressor. Now, what does that mean? Well, that's the definition of it. But what it means is this. So there might be an actual environmental stressor. It could be drought. It could be famine. It could be too much sun. It could be too much cold. How does our body perceive that? Well, we have something called the peripheral nervous system, and we use our senses for that. I mean, our sense of touch is a big one, right? So if we touch something hot, well, our hand gets pulled away. So that's very, very important. So we have that part. We have the actual stressor, but then we have perceived stress. What if we just believe that something is a stressor to us? So, for example, public speaking is a really good one, right? Giving a presentation, getting up on stage. Now, there's no real threat there. There's really no threat. It's a perceived threat, meaning like no one in the audience is going to do anything to us, but we're worried about how we'll look, how we'll sound, will we forget what to say, is everybody looking at us, etc., right? So that's a perceived stress. We've kind of come up with that one on our own. And then there's the physiological stressors. The physiological stressors are what I spoke about before, a true food sensitivity that you may or may not even know about, or candida overgrowth, or H. pylori, or parasites, or SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. It could be any particular issue within the body. Viruses is another, and your body has to respond to that. Now, this is how allostasis works. Now our body responds to that in terms of stress. And I've mentioned this before, but it's very important that we do go over that again. So a lot of times we talk about adrenal stress, adrenal fatigue, adrenal resistance, alarm stage of adrenal-based issues. But really what we're talking about is first, our mind or body perceives stress. Real or made up, but all the same, it's real to our body and it's real to our mind. So now our body responds by activating the central nervous system, or more specifically, we'll get to that in a moment, the autonomic nervous system. Now, how this works is it turns on something called the HPA axis. And I really want you to know this because this is very important, that your hypothalamus inside your brain, basically the epicenter, releases something called corticotropin releasing hormone. You don't need to know all of this, but I want you to know it, especially if you're dealing with some type of low mood, burnout, adrenal issues, fatigue, brain fog, grogginess, low energy, low libido, low drive, low thyroid, estrogen dominance, right? If you're dealing with any of those things, you need to know how this works. So what happens is then the corticotropin releasing hormone signal by the hypothalamus to tell your anterior pituitary gland, your pituitary, to release something called adrenocorticotropic hormone. Now, what does that do? Well, now your brain, two parts, the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, have told your adrenals, which sit on top of your kidneys in the lower sides of your back, to release what are called catecholamines, and that's epinephrine, norepinephrine, and aldosterone. Okay, and aldosterone being a mineral corticoid as well, which is important to look at that. We'll talk about that right now. Now, what does that do? Well, first, these catecholamines, norepinephrine and epinephrine, what do? They increase your heart rate. So a lot of people are walking around with a heart rate in the high 70s, 80s, or above. You are most likely in higher what's called sympathetic nervous system tone. So you are walking around stressed, and that is burning out your body. You are walking around potentially with higher levels of catecholamines, adrenaline, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and it's increasing your heart rate. What about people with high blood pressure? Same thing. Potentially walking around with higher blood pressure with those constricted blood vessels. This is also people that might have higher fasting glucose just any time during the day or fasted upon waking. So this is why. When you're in a constant state of stress or survival-based state, your body will tell your liver to convert glycogen, which is stored there, to glucose. And it releases that into your bloodstream. So now, regardless of if you eat any carbs or not, you have higher levels of blood sugar. That's why this goes deeper than just saying, oh, just go on this diet, go on that diet. That's the first layer of the onion, okay? That's the first layer. Diet is like just getting started. Your health goes so much deeper than your vegan, carnivore, paleo, raw, Mediterranean, whatever diet. And again, many good, many not so good. But things go well beyond nutrition. Okay, you can't solve everything with a whole food diet. And don't get me wrong, a whole food diet is a great first place to start, but not everything can be solved with that. Okay, not everything can be solved with juicing. And that's not a shot at juicing. I love juicing, right? But not everything can be solved with that, because your juicing is not going to turn off your HPA axis, no matter how hard you try. It's just not, unless you combine something else with that. But this is where it starts to get important as well. We've got dilation of what's called the bronchioles, so the lungs are starting to work a little bit harder, and that's not a good thing, all right? That's not a good thing to always feel like you're revved up. And then there is also some constriction more towards the hands and feet, so sometimes more, poor circulation. There's an increase in alertness, okay? And often there is, at least in the short term, an increase in metabolic rate. So a little bit more of a catabolic-based process where potentially, if you don't have a lot of body fat to burn, you might start to break down muscle tissue mass or bone, which we certainly don't want. Now, after we've kind of gone through that short-term norepinephrine, we go to a longer-term phase where the body responds with what's called mineral corticoids, more like the aldosterone, which is going to potentially increase blood pressure. Okay, it's going to do that by retaining sodium and water from the kidneys. Now, what does that look like? Sometimes you look more puffy. You look more swollen. Your ankles start to get a little bit more swollen. Your face starts to look a little bit more swollen. And again, as I said before, we're increasing blood pressure. Now, your body's doing that in a response to what's called allostasis, right? That's the response, because it says there's a stressor. Now, again, you're dealing maybe just with chronic stress. Just, again, not getting enough sleep, work presentations, sitting in traffic, getting their kids ready for school, a million different things. But the problem is, this is what's happening in our body. And then furthermore, as we start to produce more cortisol, or what are called glucocorticoids, now we're releasing and breaking down more glucose, okay, through a process called gluconeogenesis. It's still going to bring blood sugar, right? It's going to bring sugar and glucose into the bloodstream. It's going to decrease insulin sensitivity, which is not a good thing. Because now, especially if we're not exercising or moving our body while we're stressed, we're going to start to store more body fat, especially around the middle. We start to decrease our own natural growth hormone production. So healthy hair, skin, nails, deep sleep, all of that goes down. We start to end up with sleep-based issues. Our thyroid begins to lower, specifically T3, which is the most activated form, typically said to be about 30% of our thyroid. We start to decrease our immune system. This is very important. I've talked about this before. It's called the neuroendoimmune system. And almost no one talks about it. I've talked about it, written about it in my book, The Rain Barrel Effect. But what happens is your nervous system perceives stress. Now your endocrine system, which is your hormones, that's what we're talking about right now, begins after a while being stressed to shut down your immune system. This is exactly how I got sick at 17 years old. No one told me this. I didn't learn this for 3 years luckily I did learn it. But 3 years later, about 20 years old, a doctor pulled out the steroidal hormone pathway chart. Now, he didn't go into it as in-depth as we're doing right now, but he began to show me, listen, this is what's happening when you're stressed. And I said, I don't really feel that stressed. And he just kind of looked at me and didn't say anything. And because he knew, you don't get into this situation without something stressing your body. Now, for me, I ended up having H. pylori. I had candida overgrowth, massive candida overgrowth, and I had SIBO. I had food sensitivities. I had heavy metals, such as mercury specifically. And I had lots of mental, emotional-based stress. So, there were things that certainly were stressing my body, that's for sure, right? And now, one more thing I want to share with you is this, and this is kind of one of those hidden things that not a lot of people talk about in terms of symptoms. When you are stressed, sometimes your pupils are a little bit more dilated. That means the black part inside of your eye is a little larger. This is what I used to do when I used to do in-office exams. Typically, you get more dry mouth. You ever wonder why people on stage who are nervous, it sounds like they have just no moisture in their mouth? Well, they're nervous. That's fight or flight. That's sympathetic nervous system dominance. Everything that we just talked about is happening inside their body. They have an increased heartbeat, right? They're starting to breathe a little bit more rapidly. It might be shallow breaths, but they're breathing more rapidly. They may get constipated, or they may have diarrhea. It can go either way, meaning when people get nervous, sometimes they get loose stool, or they're just constipated because they're all locked up in the intestines. They might get tenseness in the neck and shoulder muscles, or they might actually feel like they have to urinate all the time, every 20 minutes. I don't know if you've ever had a presentation or a sporting event where you're like, I haven't even drank any water, but I'm having to feel like I have to urinate. Well, a lot of times that's that nervousness, that's that sympathetic tone. And a lot of men specifically that I work with in my practice have erectile dysfunction based issues, or they have premature ejaculation. And all of these things both caused by high sympathetic nervous system tone. So in order for us to reverse these processes, we need to know that stress is causing it. It is. It absolutely is. So the question then is, how do we get out of this, right? How do we begin to heal the body? And what I've spoken about before is that it goes well beyond diet alone. It is beginning to assess your life and become much more self-aware of the specific systems in your body. So I want to take you through just a few of those today. I want you to think about this because these are other signs of stress on the body. Do you have persistent headaches, tension headaches, or eye strain? It's another symptom just of overt stress. Do you sometimes skip meals or may even get nauseous or tired after eating? It's a sign of a weakened digestive system. Do you stay away from protein because you can't break it down very well? Another sign of weak digestive system. Maybe a lack of production of hydrochloric acid because the body is not in the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relax, rest, and digest-based state. Also, do you have skin-based issues that are showing you signs of, let's say, psoriasis, or maybe ringworm, which could be yeast fungal-based infections? Are you dealing with autoimmune issues? It's a classic hallmark sign that there is a major stressor on the body and most likely some type of intestinal permeability from a microbiome imbalance, which is typically bacterial overgrowth or yeast overgrowth. So those are places to look just at first of what's going on with the body. Next, I want to share with you this. Do you have poor tolerance to exercise? Meaning that when you exercise, you sometimes get flu-like symptoms, you get joint pain, you feel extra fatigue the next day, you might have additional soreness that you never necessarily felt before in the past. Those are things that you really want to mark down and look at because these are signs that your body is no longer able to keep up. Then, of course, I want to shift towards sleep. Are you getting a solid 8 hours of sleep per night? Between 7 to 9 hours. But again, if you're stressed, most people need that 8 hours. And do you sleep through the night? Or are you restless? Do you toss and turn? Do you wake up with all sorts of different thoughts on your mind? Is it difficult for you to fall asleep? These are, again, signs that the body is stressed. The next I'd like to share with you is this, and these last two are really important. Do you feel less ambition, less drive, less interest overall in life? This happens as you begin to become chronically burned out. And I'll talk about this on a future show as well. Really, really important to look at that. A lot of people also begin to lose interest in relationships. They have lower libido. They have less interest in just in going out, in being social, and in really making any really extra effort. And that is the body and the mind looking to really conserve energy because it does not have the same get up and go that it used to. And that simply has happened because of chronic-based stress. This is why if you are feeling any of these symptoms, I can't urge you enough to begin to get into some type of program, either with your local functional medicine doctor that specializes in this, an integrative health practitioner, or working with us over at Equilibrium Nutrition. And it could be really as simple as running the Big Five, or at least the stress, mood, and metabolism test. Really, really important. That will look at all of your different hormones, including cortisol, or running the starter kit, or running the starter kit, which is looking at your gut function, your vitamin levels, your B vitamins, which get burnt out with stress, and then looking at the minerals and metals test. But what you want to do is not pretend that this is going to go away, that it's going to get better on its own without you working on a complete program. And that really will include diet, exercise, stress reduction, toxin removal, rest, emotional balance, a supplement-based protocol, and changing of that success mindset. The reason why I urge you to do this is that I spent 10 years of my life working to get back my life. and my life is completely different than it was back then. I'm absolutely grateful for everything that I've learned, and I live a life now that I could once have only dreamed of, and really not even dreamed of it, because I didn't even think that this type of a life was possible. I didn't think it was possible to live with this type of energy, with this level of happiness and gratitude. And I want the same for you. And it won't happen necessarily overnight, but it will happen. You will be able to work towards it, especially now that you understand that your body acts and reacts in a very specific way, and it's very predictable. That's why when people say, are you able to help with this? We say yes, because we understand how the body works. It works in a very predictable nature, and that is because your body has been pre-programmed to respond through this process of allostasis every single time. So if we know that your body has been pre-programmed to respond to stress like this, we know exactly how it begins to break down. Now, each one of us is unique, and the body breaks down more in certain places, and then our genetics are allowed to transpire, and then we end up what's more specific to us, right? So for me, it was Addison's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, POTS, type 2 diabetes, fibromyalgia, etc. Okay? For you, it might be Hashimoto's. It might be sarcoidosis. It might be MS. It might be any number of issues, okay? That's where genetics matter. But my genetics, I still have the genetics for rheumatoid arthritis, for fibromyalgia, etc., type 2 diabetes, but I no longer have any of those things today. Why don't I have them today if I still have those same genes? Well, it's something called epigenetics. And I was able to turn off the signaling for those specific genes that allowed for the expression of those diseases that now I no longer have. So do we work on curing and treating diseases? We don't. We look at all of the underlying root causal factors that allow for the expression of those genes. And when we rebalance the underlying root causes, such as this HPA axis, such as this sympathetic nervous system tone, and we shift the body to more of that parasympathetic nervous system, we're able to allow the body to begin to heal. So hopefully today's podcast was helpful. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. I appreciate you. And as always, if this show was helpful, please do feel free to share it with anyone you believe it could serve. Before you go, I wanted to share a personal story with you. The real reason I began to get well finally is because I figured out what was wrong with me. And that might seem pretty obvious, but I went from doctor to doctor for over 2 years before discovering at-home functional medicine lab testing. These are the labs that enabled me to finally figure out what was wrong with my hormones, blood sugar, electrolytes, and gut health. And once I knew what was wrong, I could then follow a proven plan in order to rebalance my body from the inside out. This is why I believe so strongly in functional medicine lab testing and why I've made it my mission to share these labs with the world. Now at equa.life, you can order an at-home lab test or a lab bundle for you and your family and be able to complete it within the week. Plus, the EquaLife difference is that you're not left to try to read and figure out these labs on your own. We explain what your lab numbers mean, what they mean in the much bigger picture, and then how to go about rebalancing your body in order to heal. To see our full selection of lab tests or to set up a free lab selection call to find out what labs may be best for you, simply head on over to equa.life/labs. And do remember, we ship these all over the world. To find out more and to set up your free lab selection call, simply head on over to equa.life/labs. That's EQUI.LIFE/labs.